Can you hear me okay out there? I think so. For our first lecture of the 22 season, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Mount Gretna School of Arts Summer Lecture Series with support from Stinson Strout. I'd also like to real quick acknowledge that I'm proud to say we got one of our corporate sponsors back that I'd like to thank too, Purpose One. And this is also the first week that our students have been here. They'll raise their hands so everyone knows who they are. Many of them have only been here 2 days. It might even be their first time in this building. The little background is that the Pennsylvania Chautauqua has generously hosted these lectures since we started, and we're proud to be a part of their cultural offerings here in Mount Gretna. And I know the Chautauqua tradition was an inspiration to me as a student up in New York at what we call the Mothership Chautauqua. I spent some time at that school in the summer. So it's been very rewarding to me to get something like that going here. I was even talking about starting a Chautauqua when I was 19 at that school along with some friends. So it's good. It's been percolating a while. I think I'm ready to talk about the Four Pillars Artist Residency. So when we started the school, we imagined that I would want to reconnect with our students over time, and they would want to reconnect with Mount Gretna and their experiences here. So we thought we would start an early career artist residency for our students, but also other artists that are in the same kind of situation. So the idea is we're trying to promote them as artists and connect them with new audiences, help them sell some work, and then we spend about a year doing our best to get them some pop-up shows and get their work in front of people. We have one coming up at the Susquehanna Art Museum in August that's going to be a group show that features some of the artists, Four Pillars artists we hosted during the pandemic. We couldn't get them shows anywhere, along with this year's artists, which happen to include tonight 2 of our alumni, Jacob James and Misato Pang, if you'll wave. They're going to do a back-to-back talk about their work, about 20 minutes each. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. And questions are really nice at these things. So if you have a question, don't be afraid to raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone over to you. Because we do have some people online listening that'll want to hear that question. So I'm going to introduce Jacob first and then do another introduction for Misato before she starts. Jacob James attended Mount Gretna School of Art in 2018, and I remember how happy you were to be around a bunch of painters because you had never experienced that before. He attended Lindenwood University and Marywood University for his MFA, which is where we first met. He's now an adjunct at St. Louis University. He's been in the Bowery Gallery Jury Exhibition in New York City in 2020. He was in a figuration group show at St. Charles Community College 2022. And he has a show coming up this Friday called Small Works Summer Group Show at Housegood Gallery in St. Louis. And what do I remember about Jacob? Sincere, heartfelt. He also spent a lot of time crawling around a crawl space for the school. He's made sacrifices.
It was a job.
It was a job. He wasn't a student at the time, but cleaning out junk under one of the cottages. Fantastic painter, and I'm going to turn it over to him. And thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you all for coming. I've never done anything like this, so just bear with me. I know several of you out there, I guess. Most of you from the community. I don't know. I recognize a few of you, but anyways, thank you. Jay covered some of this already. A little bit of how I approach painting. I think some people would label me a formalist. you have line, shape, color, texture, and you're arranging those to communicate something. So, when I teach, those are things that I talk about all the time as far as, content, what someone's trying to say, or subject, what actually they want to draw or paint. Those are things that I think we can figure out on our own. So anyways, those are things that I think about a lot. This is a gouache I did a few years ago, based on a Roman fresco. I just really enjoy the simplicity of Roman paintings, Greek vases, whatever. I don't feel like art has necessarily improved since paintings thousands of years ago. I think a lot of the things that hold my interest, they really nailed it thousands of years ago. And, I'm just trying to adapt that. Of course, a lot has happened in the art world since then. I love modern art a lot. I love making the form explicit. The painting can be about the brush strokes or the marks. It can be about the shapes. It can be about the line, whatever. Those things are sort of pushed to the forefront. And I don't necessarily think that's something new, but as far as, a major art movement, it is new. And as we'll see in the next slide, it's something people have been doing for a really long time. This is a Greek ceramic piece that's at the St. Louis Art Museum. I love the simplicity, how, of course, it's a subtractive method, I believe, with the black on red, so they would have the slip on top of it and then take it away. But anyways, just the simplicity of a foot being one shape that, at least strongly resembles a brushstroke. There's a lot of liberty taken with the anatomy, but because it's so fresh and it's just not overstated in any way, and it becomes convincing. And I like that in between. They laid it down once the right way, and they were able to leave it like that. And that's something that I look for in my own work. I often work on paintings for weeks or months or however long, but they usually come together very quickly. They're realized more or less all at once. There's a Philip Guston quote. He says it takes months to make a painting, but 30 minutes to finish one. And I don't try to stick to that by any means, but I find it happening over and over again. So I guess freshness is something that I appreciate in other art. I should kind of explain the format of this. The first 10 or so images are artworks that influence me, and then the latter half is my own artwork. Giorgione, jumping forward in time a bit, I really enjoy how, the fingers, the V shape where the boy is holding the arrow, meeting the collar of the neck, and that V shape sort of being repeated with the chin, and then, the parting of the hair reflecting that movement. So these are things that I find extremely difficult to discover in a painting, and I really enjoy it when that type of thing is emphasized. And I think whether or not we really know it or can articulate it, these are the things that create aesthetic experiences. And I find that very difficult to nail down. And every time I make a work like that, or maybe anyone makes a work like that, it's something that's completely new. And I think it takes a certain amount of courage to kind of enter that space, having no real idea whether or not it's possible to create this arrangement or discover this thing. But you stick around long enough and you get over not being scared or tired of it or whatever. And then eventually good things may or may not happen. Corot, kind of difficult to see. He's one of my all-time favorite painters. Again, I think of these things as completely abstract. Just the diagonal created with the hands. You can't really see. There's a lot in the bottom of the painting. I guess it's just too dark to see right here. But, the twist of the head, a very classical pose. I guess that's one thing. So if I had to think of my own work with any sort of label, it would be contemporary classicism or something like that. Here's a Chuck Bowdish. We're jumping forward about 150 years here, or 200 years, I don't know. He's a contemporary painter. I've never met the guy, but he's someone whose work I really appreciate and think about often. Good color relationships, again, very simple on the surface as far as shapes and lines and colors or marks, but they're arranged in a way where it really sings and adds up to something more than just its parts. Scott Smith, he was one of my professors in undergrad. He taught out here in 2018 and was a big reason why I came out here. Sorry for the blurry image. There were a few of them that, but anyways, hopefully it still reads with some amount of clarity. But again, another very influential artist, and he was really my introduction into this art world. I didn't go into college an art student. I took his drawing class and just sort of blew my mind. I remember my hands being dirty with charcoal and, his instruction always being captivating and sort of elusive. And I was just so fascinated. I felt like I was really being enriched, but it was also dirty. And I liked that a lot. It just seemed like an amazing experience that I obviously didn't find in other classes. So anyways, yeah, his teaching really struck me and kind of pulled me into this world. I still keep in touch with him. Misa and I are both currently living in St. Louis. He's around there. Yeah, I'm extremely grateful to have met this person and ended up in his drawing class. Mark Weber, again, I apologize for the blurry images. I tried fixing it beforehand, but wasn't able to. He was my mentor in graduate school and still a good friend of mine. I am more and more impressed by his artwork. I will, I'll go months without really looking at this stuff, and then I eventually need help and go back to see what these guys are doing. And he totally blows my mind. So anyways, Kevin Kincaid, another painter I really admire. He and Mark are really close. Kevin's up in New York. I think maybe the minimalism you kind of saw in Chuck Bowdish works, or the Greek vase, you can still see it here, very pared down. Clear figure ground interaction, right? There's just one subject, more or less one complex shape on top of a ground. And getting those two things to work together is for me the fun, the puzzle. And so I like that here. And this work might be from the 90s. I'm not sure the date, maybe the early 2000s. And then for the following slide, you can see how they evolved. Completely abstract. The color is a bit more I guess, saturated, different sense of light, but again, a complex shape on top of a ground. And I like the challenge of getting these things to sort of interlock and somehow seem self-explanatory. I just really wanted to include this picture. It's on my computer at home, and I wasn't able to get a better version of it, but this is you'll just have to take my word for it. This is in Assisi, and I am on the right, Alan Feltus is on the left, then Mark Weber, then Alan's wife, Lonnie. They're both painters, really successful painters, actually. But anyways, Mark took me out there to Rome and Assisi, and I think 2019, and it was an experience that really stuck with me, and I think I'm still digesting and trying to get back to. So I actually did this when I was working here in 2019. This was right after grad school. I put away the oil paint and started working with gouache very consistently, just small works on paper. Something I still might get back to. I love the medium. I love how malleable it is. I love how quickly I can work. I would combine it with these water-soluble crayons. And it's just a great way to get a lot of mileage. It's very portable, very easy to work with. I love everything about it. I'm just not working with it right now. So I spent maybe a few years basically just working with gouache, doing small works on paper. I have a lot of them. I'm exhibiting them right now. And this is one of those. This is a little bit bigger. Another gouache on paper. This was done last year. I started exploring the cowboy hat theme that I took from a friend of mine, Ryan Ward. I saw that he was doing them in his paintings, and I like the shake, so it became a challenge to figure out how to incorporate the shake into a composition, and this is one that I thought was more successful. I used to live in Senegal, West Africa also, and I remember sometimes it would be so dusty that the sun would just look like a dinner plate up in the sky. It was a weird thing. It was just a white circle. It didn't look like a sun. It didn't even really look like it was radiating light. And so I do that sometimes. I just stick a dinner plate up in the sky. Another cowboy painting. I don't know how many are in here. This one's mixed media, kind of really different, I think, than a lot of my other stuff. It was a print that I collage and then painted on top of. You can't see any evidence of the print at all, except for the edges of it hanging off and all of that. But just another cowboy painting. I'm part of a figure drawing group in St. Louis that meets every week. I go probably once every 2 or 3 months. I'm not very consistent, but I do really like it, and I have a few painter friends that go, which is really nice. And I always take gouache. So this is done from life. I think there are a couple more in here that I included. One challenge that I find for myself is breaking away from modernism, the emphasis on the influence, I guess, of Matisse, Picasso, whoever, everyone like that. I think they cast very large shadows, and trying to escape that is a challenge for me. Something that I like to try to do. This one feels a little bit modern. I don't know whether or not it's successful, but I like it a lot as a painting regardless. I don't. Another drawing or another gouache done from a live model. This is on Yupo paper, which is basically just a sheet of plastic. I don't know what it's made of, but it shows the brush strokes a lot differently than the other paper here. Now we're getting into this year, but this is much more recent. It is such a small painting. It's kind of funny seeing it this large. A lot of times when I'm working, and I don't suggest this for anyone, I just put down marks until something happens. This was one of the successes. I'm trying to be a bit more structured and do more planning right now. Have direct references, whether they're paintings or my drawings or other paintings I've done or whatever. But the way that I arrived to this is it's generally just such a struggle, and not something that I really want to keep doing. I always try to make things easier for myself, but I thought this did work pretty well as just an invented portrait. Another one, for me, this is really a high point, and from time to time as painters, we do this work, and we're just not really sure, at least for me, man, how can I do that again? And I have no idea. And in the end, it's not worth trying to repeat. You just have to move on. But that's kind of a struggle for me, and this is a piece that is definitely something that I would like to kind of reach that level again. Fortunately, it wasn't too long ago. This is an oil painting, a little bit bigger than the gouache, about 20. I think this is 24 by 18. Again, just more invented portraits. I kind of enjoy how we think and act and respond differently depending on our source. And imagination is a valid source. We're working from life or another painting or whatever. And so I think these things can feel a bit really playful, right, when we're working from imagination. And I think that playfulness comes through here. And next one. This is the last slide. Again, another painting that I think, man, I wish I could do that again. But this was also done just a couple of months ago. An invented figurative painting, no reference, just putting down marks, hoping for the best, trying to get something good to appear on the surface. So, I'm switching gears a little bit now that I'm here. I have a plein air set up. I go out and I paint houses, and I really like working from direct observation. So I'm trying to do that as much as possible. But of course, when it's rainy, we have to get creative and figure out another means to get things done. That's all. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Misa. This is my artist statement that you see on the slide. And just for a little brief, like a deep, brief summary of my artist statement, which is painting being a space of rest and discovery, I want to quote my teacher, Susanna Coffey from New York Studio School. She said that painting is the one proof that interiority exists. We could share them with the world while our dreams remain locked within our own bodies. Over and over, I've discovered that painting, it becomes a space where it withstands seasons and time, and things that we carry to paintings could be questions, could be desires, could be longing. And these are the things that have become really important to me, besides all the formal issues that I try to discover through painting. So to start this artist talk, I want to show you a slide that just briefly explains where I come from. So I'm born and raised in Hong Kong. My mother's Japanese, my dad is Chinese. So I spent about a fourth of my time in Japan and pretty much half of my life in Hong Kong. And I moved to the US when I was 17. And since then I've been here for about 12 years. So it's kind of an interesting place to start the artist talk, because I feel like these influences over time start to kind of merge. So when I came to Mount Gretna in 2016, I had just graduated from Brooklyn College with a BA in studio art. At the time, I had no idea what perceptual painting meant. I have never painted landscapes before, but the concepts and all the paintings that I was exposed to at the time became really instrumental to what I pursued after, which is MFA in painting. But during that time in Mount Gretna, people had brought up drawing marathon a lot and how that had changed their lives, and I decided to just try it for myself. So after Mount Gretna, I went to the studio school for a drawing marathon, and that was in 2016. Here you see on the slide. We were making large-scale drawings. A lot of them were life-size, if not bigger. And throughout the time there, the questions that pertain to drawing were just very, just thrown around a lot, kind of similar to Mount Gretna School of Art, but in a more kind of focused way, where we have to discover what marks can do. And one of the biggest things that I learned during that time was how lines and marks could create space. When you make a mark down a paper, it's not just existing on a surface as a decorative element, but it's something that is cosmic, and it creates it divides. It just divides the space. So there's something that is really poetic about the discoveries that we made during that time. And that led to me applying for MFA. And this is a drawing that I made during, I think, the first marathon there. It's life-size drawing, and we spend weeks on these. So it's just really interesting to see how, one thing led to another, and eventually I ended up being here. And for our master's program, we get to choose our atelier. So I studied with Graham Nixon, where we paint from life. We set up a model from 9 to 1 every day, and we were given a limited palette. And so here you see on the left, there's a palette, and we have to mix the colors and try to assign and translate each colors to the values in the space that we see. And a lot of those colors cannot be really found in the natural world. So there's a lot of invention that takes place as we try to translate and understand how we see the world around us. For my thesis, it was kind of difficult to know what exactly to go for. And one of the things that I was really encouraged to do was to reach in and find out what it is that holds my interest. And the only thing that I could really think of was my own upbringing and how I felt a lot of displacement. So I just went and looked for a lot of images that kind of pertain to my culture, rituals, events that growing up I never really had access to, but it's really, it's just always interesting to me, and I never really got to be part of it. So I think it's interesting to go back and try to invent these events in a way that feel right, because I never felt like I was part of any of my own culture, if that makes any sense. So here you see some of the images. The earlier ones were, the one before this was sumo wrestling, and this is just, Chinese New Year, and trying to go back and reinvent a space in which I feel comfortable. And because at the studio school, all we learned was European painting. So a lot of that was also influenced by these painters that I was looking at. And so merging all of these influences together were pretty difficult, but these are just the things that I was really interested in at the time. So after I graduated in 2019, so shortly after my graduation in June 2019, Hong Kong was going through a lot of political turmoil. This is a protest that was taking place around that time, and there were 2 million people that came out because the government passed an extradition bill that essentially consented people to be sent to China and be kind of subjected to that legislative system, which, it's very problematic for us. And so during that time I just graduated, I was in New York, but that really impacted me quite a bit because that kind of signified some kind of collapse to democracy in my own hometown that I had no access to at the time. I didn't have money to fly back. So I was just kind of tuning in pretty remotely, but there was a 12 hours difference. So I pretty much didn't sleep at night, just staying up and looking at the news. I was fortunate enough to move into a studio next to Chico Greenwald. Paul Ressico was my neighbor at the time, and it was just really fantastic. I didn't really get to meet them, but I just thought it was kind of interesting to be very close to these painters. But during that time in that studio, I just kind of tried to process all of these feelings that I don't really have words for. So just those images kind of come out where like censorship and grief and like losing identity for the overall Hong Kong people and me being far away. I think they kind of bleed through the images. A lot of those things are just kind of a reflection of what I was engaged with, reading the news, and just a lot of kind of family division that took place within my own family and also within other people that I talked to. And
there's just this chasm of opinions and beliefs and values that became very detrimental to how we related to each other. So these kind of came out just very subconsciously, but I was just trying to process it, and painting felt like the only appropriate avenue for that. And so I also started to think of more allegorical painting, incorporating more symbolism. So became more intentional about how I wanted to create an image that also felt kind of funny. So Winnie the Pooh, obviously, maybe that's not obvious, but people compare the leader of China to Winnie the Pooh because he kind of looks like him. And then flipping over to Jar, that was the original British colony flag for Hong Kong, and how that promise was being broken. So milk and honey, kind of like a biblical, tone to milk and honey being the promised land, and us never getting that. Thinking of Hong Kong as kind of the martyr, so the child, the anointed, the one that to be sacrificed, and how cruel that feels. Even in imagery, thinking about the implications of what that really meant, kind of jarring, but I made it. And so when COVID hit in 2020, I flew back to Hong Kong because I didn't really feel safe in New York. And around that time, I just started making smaller works because I didn't really have a home. So I just switched gears. Instead of painting oil, I just did a lot of mixed media stuff like acrylic, gouache, watercolor, crayons, color pencils, anything that I could get my hands on. And how I started kind of embedding messages in paintings, because we're not allowed to really say what we feel about the government. So the use of color, black and yellow, those are black, yellow, white, those are very significant to the Hong Kong protests for democracy, and incorporating more of kind of code. If people in Hong Kong see it, they probably know what it is, but it's kind of hidden. So around the pandemic, I met Jacob through one of the studio visits, moved to St. Louis, which is crazy. Who does that during a pandemic? I did that. And I think going away from Hong Kong when the national security law passed, and feeling like I can't fight as an artist. And so I need to find a place to continue to nurture my creative freedom. I felt like St. Louis was a really good place. They have really interesting architecture, and I just was really drawn to the overall kind of history that comes with it. Once again, when I moved here, I didn't think I would stay for long term. So I just started working strictly black and white with different media, usually charcoal, color pencil, because I felt that colors were becoming a problem for me. So I wanted to just go back, to the base and just starting again, learning about how picture playing and how these marks could create a sense of force and create this pressure. And at the time, I was also reading a lot of Hans Hoffmann's writing or his teaching. And so I really feel like I was just trying to understand it. And over time, I started adding colors, but still pretty minimal. I just really wanted to escape from representation as much as possible, because I feel like that's becoming, it's hard for me to think about things abstractly or find poetry at the time within representational work. And eventually I worked back into collage and colors, has a lot of Christian undertone, going through some kind of stuff then. Trying to kind of grapple with my own background and history with Christianity. And so, the title kind of says the title kind of gives away. Yeah, just thinking a lot about shapes and how much narrative can you give just by putting shapes on top of shapes, and how colors can create that sense of drama and poetry. So a lot of it was just kind of the biblical stories that I was drawn to are usually just kind of that transformative moment, that pivoting point of a character. And I was just really drawn to how can I use that to as pictures, So, and then eventually I got back around to painting landscapes. I have not painted landscapes since I was ever since I was in Mount Gretna. So like there were maybe 4-year break, and then all of a sudden it just like was so exciting. There are a lot of different trees in St. Louis, and I just love that urgency of like there's so much you can learn from just by observing nature. These are kind of surprising to me because I did it and I was like, wow, I can do that. That's cool. Acrylic is a great medium to work with on site because you can like get through a lot of decisions way quicker. Once again, collage, colors. I don't want to talk too much about these because there are a lot of slides. So what I really love about St. Louis, I'm selling it a little here because I want people to move there. The buildings are so beautiful. The abandoned buildings have so much history, and the decay somehow makes it even more beautiful. And I think I was just really drawn to it. You probably have seen the pictures from Jacob's slideshow, the first slide. We have a studio in an abandoned church that got turned into a skate park. In that neighborhood, there is just a lot of low-income household, and the buildings are most of the time vacant or neglected. So we would go on a walk, and I would take pictures, and I would go back to the studio and work in collage from them. And I feel like that's my attempt to understand the space because I just don't feel safe bringing my easel out and painting from life. I feel like I resort to this method of like trying to understand how can this translate to just simple shapes and colors. And this is just another one. I just really love those buildings. I don't know what it is. It's kind of weird. I don't know why I was really obsessed with them. I just wanted to understand it better. So other than like just taking from a photograph to paint from them, I wanted to kind of take one step away from the thing that I'm looking at and then creating collage from it. And you'll get what I mean when I go to the next slide. So that building was from the collage, and it looks nothing like the original building, but I just felt the need to almost like get inside and crawl through the space visually to get a sense of what that feels like in space. And so that's a drawing that I we call a synthetic image. Essentially, you pull different sources to create a new image. And so that's a synthetic drawing of like the motif of that building, and then I incorporated figures on top of it. And I feel like having seen the Medici collection and the Met and seeing Contorno and Bronzino, really starting to look back at the master paintings has influenced the way I think about figures and how you can use the figure as part of using figures to create space. And so I just want that kind of meandering of these, I don't want to say negative space, but like the spaces in between and how all of these things interlock to create a very tight space. And so that's what I was going for. I mean, that's still work in progress, but I kind of want to put it up because it's also good to show people what you're working on. So that was what's kind of cooking in the studio. And I don't know why I did this. I took it upon myself to do a collage transcription of Piero della Francesca's The Baptism of Christ. Something about his division of space and him being a mathematician, and how he creates these intervals of spaces in between the figures, and how much power it holds, even though it's a very quiet composition. That always kind of shocks me a little bit. And so I try to do a similar thing where I would like paint some of the paint strips and try to like recreate that. But at some point I realized you have to invent. Even though you're copying from someone, you have to invent, because at some point, somehow something doesn't work and you have to take the ownership of what you're making. And that's kind of terrifying to me because I respect Piero and I just don't feel like I should be doing that. But that's kind of the responsibility we have as artists, is you have to be responsible for the world that you create. And so that's the tricky part. And so these are the more recent works. Once again, Hoffman has definitely influenced me, as so has Peroni, who is also influenced by Hoffman. And all of these things are kind of showing up in the studio. Just really purely thinking about direction and tension and relief, the gravity that a painting could hold. How can you command space with just a small painting? I mean, this is not that small, but how can you command that attention? So yeah, just thinking about how to use color better without excessive like saturation. So that's kind of like one thing I'm trying to think about. I'm thinking about the collision of planes, and something Bruce Gagne talked a lot about also. It's like draw to the plane. You don't just draw to the plane. Plasticity, like three-dimensional quality within a two-dimensional world. So these are the things I think about often, but of course I fail sometimes, and maybe most of the time, but I think it's worth the effort, Some of the personal life kind of bleeds into the work as well. COVID was hard. Therapy is very important for all of us. And so I just feel like it kind of shows up like the parts of my life that I didn't necessarily like consciously try to like invite into the studio. They kind of come up. This is just I've seen from the play therapy that I love and am part of. We also have a wonderful collection in St. Louis Art Museum, the Max Beckman collection. And I feel like I'm just trying to actively seek them out and try to understand how can you cram so many things into a space yet feel like, there's just so much air at the same time, or like luminosity of the colors. And so I attempted. I don't know how well that is. I don't fully love this painting, but I feel like it's a good attempt. And other things that I try to do in my studio is just finding other materials. So this is slate, and that we bought from a refurbished shop. And I think they came from Europe, somewhere in Europe. The slates came somewhere from Europe. And I just felt the need to honor my own heritage a little more, because I was taught like the Western way of painting. And I feel like I'm missing a lot of kind of like, what does it mean to be an Asian painter? And maybe that's not important, but to me, I just felt like I feel deeply disconnected from that side of my world. And so wanting to challenge how I deal with kind of the foreground, middle ground background, and just have this like expansive space. That might be a better example. So like how that thing just exists in a far distance, and there's nothing to indicate that interval, and it's just kind of things layering, and the scale doesn't necessarily go down in size. So these are just some of the things that I was thinking about. I don't know if that's the next last slide, but maybe next. That's it. That's all I was doing.
Jacob, when you did the piece, for what area were you?
I was in Senegal, West Africa. I had a landscape painting set up and would go on each land again. So it was a good experience.
Misa, you could respond. Like, how do you think about color and the way that it's staying, and your struggles with color? What are you aiming for?
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but for my grad school, the colors just jump from one to another. And I think it's really exciting to use blue to red to yellow to green. And at some point, the colors to me feel like they lost meaning. They aren't really there to do anything. One thing that to me that's really important is no matter every single color, every single mark you put onto a painting should add to the structure. It shouldn't just be there. When you watch a movie, you don't want just random people, random actors hanging around. And that's to me starting to be a problem where everybody is talking all at the same time. And so you see a lot of red and pink and orange, but when you start using the same color relationship for every single painting, that's when it loses its character. And I think I struggle with not using red. And so I needed to step away and just understand how they can create different kind of drama depending on the colors that you put next to each other.
Has the painter, this is for one or both of you, has the painter Robert De Niro Sr. had any influence on your work?
I'm assuming that's for me. I don't know. Because I just posted one online a couple of days ago that I love Robert De Niro Sr. For those of you who don't know him, it's the actor's dad. He was a pretty prolific painter in New York, and there's a restaurant somewhere out there that has his paintings on it.
Lisa, I just admire that you've done this level of introspection through your work. It speaks on a very personal level to me, what I've been through as well with art. It just comes out in a very interesting and unique way for you as you navigate through painting. And one of the questions that I have, because coincidentally, I just went back to reading Hans Hofmann's Search for the Real just a few days ago. I've been exploring his readings and writings, and I was just wondering if anything from his writing or visually, what is resonating or speaking to you at the moment?
Oh my gosh, that's a loaded question.
I know.
I can't really say. So that's kind of the tricky part is like reading Hans Hofmann. So we have the book called Color Creates Light, in case you guys don't know about it. It's a great book. I only realized retrospectively that that's what studio school is kind of teaching a lot about. So it's hard for me to really tell you specifically what it is, but understanding the dichotomy of lines. When you put a line on a paper, it's not just a line that exists on the surface, but you're actually creating space. That one line could be something so much more, and how that acts as a metaphor for like something really profound that we don't think about on a daily basis. But with Hans Hofmann, he said something about having empathy towards the thing that you described, towards the thing that you experience. And that had really changed me because it allows me to kind of get away from just what I see, which is what we do, right? Painters need their eyes to see and work. But it's asking us to go deeper than just seeing what's on the surface and really understand how that thing exists in the physical world and how can you carry that physicality into visual poetry. I think that to me was a very, very important kind of lesson.
I actually want to piggyback that real quick. I think that the thing with Hoffman is he basically introduced European painting to the US, and it's not always his direct influence, but how that has affected so many people in this room, whether they know it or not. And so I think it's also a matter of like going back to Hoffman, like tracing our education history, whatever. He's just such a key figure.
Can you speak to some of the other projects you're working on?
Thank you for asking, Madeline. We wanted to make a point of bringing that up. We have a website called Space Scribbles. Misa's actually spearheading it right now. A couple of years ago when we met, she was doing these virtual studio visits when Misa was in Hong Kong, and she was doing these studio visits with people all over the world. And I was one of those people, and I wanted her to have a platform for her content, and it evolved into I think a tool that's helped growing community, definitely for me, meeting people from all over the place, online exhibitions, interviews, articles. We have a section called Junk Drawer, which has really great stuff in it. So I'm always kind of like 50-50 on the name.
In some of your work and stuff, you've been working on the non-traditional grounds and surfaces. Which do you feel depend on objects rather than just images? Is that intentional, and how do you think about the work as object?
Are you talking about the works on slate?
Primarily slate, also some of the collages. And
yeah, that's a really good question. Definitely the ones on slate. I don't know if you guys heard of wabi-sabi, like a philosophy in art making in Japan. They honor the earth very differently from the Western way. They don't hold on to the things that they create. They just let them go into decay, essentially. Not that that's what I'm trying to do, but I think something about the objective of that kind of transcends just being an object, but also like an experience, an aesthetic experience that Jacob kind of talked about a little bit. I don't know. I don't think that's something I actively thought about, but I definitely approached them very differently than just paintings, which is why it was really exciting because I was thinking more about cave painting, so something more like primal and like something more urgent and just immediate and simple. And I'm also thinking about them more as like words. like if you look at the Chinese characters, they are essentially pictures that eventually became like simple strokes. So I just wanted to recreate that feeling. And I'm just beginning to do it, so it's kind of hard for me to dive deeper into that, but that's definitely part of it. Yeah.
I was struck by the fact that when we look at your work, both of you, it's on a very large scale because of the screen. Then I see in the corner most of your work is actually very small. Some of the pieces less than a foot each. I wonder to what extent is the scale of your canvas, so to speak, does that affect what you think what you think of that? Or is it just coincidental that you?
Yeah, I think, well, one is portability, right? When I didn't have a studio and I'm moving around all the time, that's one factor. But also, I think the difficult questions of composition are more easily solved on a smaller scale. I find myself less critical of detail and I guess smaller things. And so it's easier to see the big picture, right? It's easier to see the whole rectangle and how the parts interact from big to small. And so for me, wanting to learn, I found small scale, especially with wash, was very well suited for me. Again, just getting a lot of mileage, a lot of experience.
I just want to also add a little bit. Having taught just a little, maybe a little less than a year in college, the first thing that I tell my students is to consider their field of vision. That rectangle, we cannot escape that, right? Whenever we are involved in painting, I mean, someone can argue on this, conceptual artist or something, but you have to deal with a rectangle, and that is your field of vision, that is your world, and everything that exists within it is relative. So you can use a really small brush, create very small figures. So if we look at, miniature paintings or like even some manuscripts, like these things have so much power and it commands so much attention. And that's kind of something that I think is really exciting, because when we think of exciting paintings, we don't think about the small paintings that hang on like gallery, hallway or something, but like it's really fun to kind of explore the potentials of scale within your work.
When do you know it's time to move on from a style or a medium or a genre?
For me, the whole process is so desperate. I just try to keep moving. There's no real answer. If I just jump around, do as much as I can. And of course, when I put it in a slideshow, it looks cohesive because I'm selecting from 50 or 100 things or whatever. But yeah, I just try to keep going. That's all I really have.
Yeah, I think we both try to keep a couple paintings going at once. So we just move on fairly quickly and then come back in. So like one of the painting, that's a therapist, like a long one, that was a rework painting from a grad school painting. So it's like, when artists say they work on a painting for 10 years, I feel like that's part of like waiting and coming back to it is part of it. So I don't feel like there's ever a time where it's really finished. And I'm also reading Kajori's catalog this morning, and he just said, the works always suggest the next thing. And so you kind of have to accept that. And I think it's exciting to be able to just like leave it as what it is and then come back and rework.
Thanks so much. I loved your presentations, both of you. I felt in both of your presentations, there's really interesting ways that the space you're in is affecting your work. I think you're here this summer for the residency. Mm-hmm. So I'm really keen to see what are you expecting to get out of being in this very different space and being in harmony with nature. What do you think? Where do you think that'll go?
I'm just really happy to be here. I know that sounds like a very simple. I don't know. I think that's exciting. I've been working with ink drawings quite a bit. Just working ink from landscapes and then translating those ink drawings into paintings. I also paint on site a lot more. And then whenever I finish that painting with acrylic, because I paint on site with mostly acrylic, usually I don't like it when I see the finished painting, and I just bring that painting in and I enlarge the scale and work in oil. So like just taking several iterations of the same image and trying to understand how I was seeing and approaching that landscape was really helpful. And it's incredibly frustrating because sometimes I wonder, if this is worth it. And it's like a weird thing that comes to your mind because there's just so many things going at once. And I'm trying to say a lot and not being able to articulate it through pain. But I think one thing that I definitely set myself for is to find weird lighting. It's been rainy, which I think kind of works, but like when it's cloudy or rainy, everything kind of feels flattened. And so the lack of contrast is kind of what unfortunately, I just have to deal with. And learning how to use those colors to just create these minor pushes so that I'm really playing with the advancement and the receding of planes. These are the things that I'm kind of thinking about actively. And hopefully I can start inventing landscapes as well. But I feel like that has to come from a lot of rigorous looking and working from nature, which I'm really hoping to do this summer.
Yeah, I find that a little bit difficult to think about how exactly it will affect me or affect the work. I always remove myself from the subject to some degree, which is why I'm generally more of a studio painter than an on-site painter. So even the landscapes that I've done here that I'm happy with, they don't really resemble. They don't exactly resemble what I was looking at. So I don't think I'm one to. I like to think of myself as a portrait artist, but now that I'm saying it out loud, it really doesn't make sense.
I'd like to thank you both. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.